Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dancing with Damage. I'm Ian, your resident philosopher.
And I'm Abby, your resident author.
And today, we talk more about high schools and how they can be improved in our theory to promote love and reduce damage in society. Hey, Abby.
Indeed. And I really like the title Ian chose. Classy.
It is a fine title for a fine subject. You may recall on the last occasion we chatted about some things that would be, in our argument, better for high school students, sort of ages 13 to 18 in that range, in developed countries to focus on, rather than a major focus on the traditional academia, such as, physics and biology and all these sort of things you recall probably from your own high school days. And we still want to see some of that, Abby?
Indeed. It's important those subjects are still involved. And as you know, if you're an educator, if you experience the educational system, you can merge a lot of subjects together. So instead of having a science separate from a math, you might have a class where you incorporate both and you learn both rather equally. So there's lots of ways you can spice up the system, but most importantly, adding in these core loving techniques as a pillar of education.
And speaking of spicy, that leads us nicely into what we might talk about today. So in the last episode, Abby, we together created some days of the week examples of what a high school student might potentially do if they were sort of following the philosophy and the social blueprint. For example, on Monday, they might go and tutor young people in elementary school and help them with one-on-one tutoring of the arts they had already mastered, such as languages and music and physical education, things like that. And then on a Tuesday, they might go to their adopted senior, one might say, to spend a day with a senior, not only improving the senior's quality of life and helping them age in place, but also give good skills that are synonymous and similar to parenting skills that a high school student may use if they become a parent later on. So that was sort of the Monday, Tuesday examples.
And we only got to Tuesday. So hopefully this episode will be able to continue on to maybe Wednesday. And if we're bold, all the way to Friday.
These high school students are going to be busy. They can't even get to Wednesday. No, they can't. And something, Abby, we chatted about last time was how there were sort of maybe 3 general areas of learning that would be much more useful for a person ages 13 to 18 as they get ready to make the next step into the river of life. We talked about parenting skills. We talked about household skills. And we talked about general knowledge skills. And so in terms of, you mentioned spicy, what about learning to cook?
That is such a useful skill. And the amount of young adults, and I'm going to use that term to qualify the people who are late teens to mid 20s, because we know adults from the book are, where's book copies over here? We know from the book that you become an adult around the age of 25. So obviously you're something before that. So I'm going to use the term young adult. I hope that's okay with you.
I think it's a great idea.
I don't know if we officially use that as a definition, but I think I can take liberties. I am the author.
She's the resident author. She said it right at the beginning. If you got a copy of the book, then we are talking today about, we're continuing chapter 25.
Yes.
Just in case you want to
follow along. And wonder what we're doing.
Yes, if we've totally confused you, then 25, that's the chapter. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say young adults, we're going to say mid-teens to about 25. I've noticed there's an endemic of them not being able to cook. And there have been news articles about young people in debt more so than previous generations. And one of the factors was spending thousands of dollars a year on things like DoorDash or Uber Eats or some kind of service that has exorbitant fees attached to it to take food from a restaurant and deliver it to your person. So not only are you getting restaurant food, but you're having it delivered so you don't even have to go attain the food yourself. Because a lot of young people, when they were interviewed, said, well, we just don't know how to cook. We don't have those skills. So this is sort of necessary. And it's sad because cooking is so much cheaper. It's so much healthier. It's so much more fulfilling than going to a restaurant every day of your life. Hey, Ian.
It is. And, you know, cooking classes used to be called home ec in a lot of places, home economics. So it's not like we're the first person to propose or the first people to propose that cooking be taught as a subject in secondary school. But, you know, it's sort of like a relay race. Let's say the runners are running a relay race and one runner passes the baton to the next, and then that runner throws the baton into the ditch and keeps running. They don't have anything to pass on to the next runner, you see? And in the same way, I believe, and I think Abby, you might agree with me, that the baton of learning the simple skill of cooking has been dropped somewhere in the last 20, 30 years between generations, so that a parent potentially of this generation, I think we're on Alpha.
Maybe. Yes, that sounds right.
Gen Alpha, I think they're called nowadays. But in any event, the baton has been thrown. So why not find it out of the ditch or just get a new, better one?
New, better baton.
And that could be taught as part of the household skills in the new education system we're proposing. And the reason I say it could be a new and shinier baton, you know, not only is that far more fun, it could be bedazzled.
Ooh, how fun. Then you can see it if you accidentally drop it. You can quickly pick it back up.
That's right. Gone are the days of the boring baton, boring wooden baton that no one liked, so much so that they tossed it aside. No, this baton will have glow sticks. And the glow sticks are those of nutrition and taste. Yeah, because here's the thing. The knowledge of nutrition and nutritional science has really progressed, Abby, in the last few decades to the point now where we all ought to be very keenly aware of the dangers of processed foods and densely caloric foods and very sugary foods. And also, we should be taking note in our argument of where things are coming from, to be mindful of the ecosystem and how it impacts the world broadly. If you're getting food from someplace that's suffers from child labor or, you know, other injustices like that, we want to be sort of aware of that. Abby, do you think there's a way for the new education system to craft a cooking experience class that could accommodate all these new realities?
I absolutely do. There's really no limit to what we can accomplish as humans. And I think that those are very reasonable parameters. I mean, do you already have a vision of how that could look?
Yes. I'm thinking a nice golden crust with lots of apples in it. So I really like apple pie.
He does.
Abby, what would be the first thing you would like to learn how to cook in the new cooking class?
Can I take into account I already know how to cook some things?
Yes. So Abby is a skilled baker and a skilled cook of many disciplines.
Not all foods, but many. Yeah, that's fair.
Many. So of your repertoire that doesn't exist, your unrepertoire, as it were, what would you like to learn, do you think, in these new cooking classes?
I'd really like to learn how to make really good gnocchi or pierogies. I find those are delicious foods. I've attempted to make them once or twice, but I feel like I could learn a lot of really good core skills. And if I may, just for fun, a recipe I would like to teach, something that I love, is chicken pot pie. I love eating chicken pot pie. I love making chicken pot pie. And I love, again, eating chicken pot pie. What's something that you would like to learn and maybe something you would like to teach?
Deviled eggs. You always get them at parties.
Which is which?
A party? It's like when you go celebrate.
No, do you know this recipe or would you like to teach this recipe?
Well, just for fun, I'm going to start by learning it. And then, watch me, then I'm going to teach it. Because here's the thing. Like I say, deviled eggs, you always get them at events and things like that. And they always look so nice. They've got these little white cups and then this frothy, fluffy, golden yolk. And then usually someone will sprinkle paprika on them. And it is just so good. And I eat them and they don't really taste like eggs anymore. They have like an echo of an egg, but they've totally changed. I don't know how people do that.
You kind of sound like a food critic. Ah, there's an echo of an egg in this dish. It has beautiful presentation. It is light and fluffy, like a beautiful cloud.
There you go. So I would be welcome at these food classes to critique all the new dishes. But anyway, so that's what I would choose, Abby. And In terms of the value I think it would bring is threefold. I mean, you already mentioned how expensive it can be if young people go into adulthood not knowing how to economically put together a dish. I've sort of touched on the health benefits of cooking from ingredients rather than buying foods that the ingredients have been pre-combined, which usually means they've been processed and preserved, which of course we know are the hallmarks of carcinogens and other organ system problems. And thirdly, it is an important skill to bring a family together. And so these are all important skills. And it's something you can take pride in. Again, if you think back to your high school days and you try and remember something you learned in, I don't know, civics, or what's another example? Something you learned in a physics class, for example.
Geography, that's a fun one.
Yes, but I mean, a lot of these things you learn, memorize, and then you forget
Yep.
by usually the next month. I bet you, if you took a high school student and they did their final exams, let's say in grade 10, the average high school student in a developed country,
Mm-hmm.
and they did their exams and they passed, but you gave them the same exams 1 month later, I bet you, and I'm basing this on nothing but conjecture and my own life experience, I bet you they wouldn't do nearly as well, or some of them would fail. But what do you think?
I think that's absolutely true. I think if you learn something, actually, one thing I found as a teacher is when you teach something, you retain it 10 times more than if you learn it. So one of the original tricks was writing things down with a pen and paper or pencil and paper, because I don't fully understand how it works, but that process makes your brain sort of focus on that information. If you just type the information, you're not really retaining anything. You're sort of a human typewriter. So you don't really retain information. And you hear stories about students cramming the night before, just trying to get enough into their short-term memory that they can pass. But very shortly thereafter, they haven't actually put this information to long-term memory. They haven't made meaningful connections with it. They haven't created life experience. They haven't had to teach it to somebody else and truly understand what they're learning. So it is very easy to lose that. It's once you have to essentially teach it that it becomes a part of you. If you can teach something and you thought about it in a way that you could explain it to somebody else in several different ways and make it make sense and connect it to things they already understand, then usually you can retain that information.
I like that. But it sounds like, Abby, you're saying that things that really involve more than just minimal movements and minimal reading, things that are more, and I keep doing this with my hands, because what I mean to say is when humans use more of our bodies to do something and more of our brains to do something, we tend to absorb it better. It is like a paper towel. Let us say you wanted to absorb a big pile of water. Well, it's always better to swish the paper towel around like this to absorb it all than it is to just dab it with the corner, you see?
I don't know if Ian has encountered many spills, and I don't think I'm inclined to let him be in charge of future ones.
You must swish. And so too is the brain. So I think that would be a lot of fun. And obviously there are logistical challenges that come along with that. But as I said in the last episode, and I don't know if Abby, you agree with me, there's always ways around logistical problems with some creativity and keeping in mind that any extra spending to accommodate certain curriculums, if the curriculum is an investment in the young person, a true investment, the funds that are spent to achieve that investment will always overwhelm, in the long term, the short-term costs. And again, this is an example of love when you think about it, even though it's not parent-child. It is society showing love for the children of society by making a short-term sacrifice of funds, potentially, if it costs more to set up a cooking class than it would be to throw up a PowerPoint about whatever history is going on in the classroom. And that's an example of love, because it's a long-term game.
So we have Ian's phone now because we like to do some fact checking, and I wanted to Google.
That's where it went.
It's right here. So as an example, and obviously there are many factors. So this is just generally as an example, but science is sort of shown us that if a student does not perform well in school, they don't feel connected to their community, they don't feel connected to the curriculum, they drop out of school, the likelihood they will lead a life of crime is, I think, thricefold or tenfold more likely. Usually they're
Woof, we're going. No, this is good.
Oh, okay. No, normally there is a link between a lack of education or an inability to complete high school and criminality. That's unfortunate. It's not the case for everybody, but it is a correlation.
See, I just was talking about deviled eggs, but you really brought it.
Well, I know because you said as an example, it'll cost less in the future to have these courses put in place for the government and how it'll save money. And I think it can be really hard when people are considering policy and legislation changes to conceptualize what something means, because you look at an upfront cost and you sort of can't fathom how it is possible that you could ever recuperate that money or how it could ever actually be worth something in the long term. So I wanted to give a concrete example. I have experience anecdotally in both education and criminal law, so I have seen some overlap of this. And I just wanted to look up the current stat. So it costs an average of about $150,000 a year to house every single prisoner in Canada. That's per prisoner. So how many people do you think are incarcerated in Canada every year?
Oh boy, incarcerated. So while she's doing some math or looking that up, first of all, I bet you that's $150,000 Canadian. So if you're watching from somewhere else, I'm guessing that's like 120,000 US dollars. Don't quote me on that, but maybe that's the ballpark. Speaking of the Google, Abby, I think, is doing a smart thing by bringing some sort of fact checking, because we're at the part of the social blueprint where it will be useful to have certain facts at our fingertips. Bear in mind, we do recognize that searching something on Google doesn't mean the answer is 100% accurate or right. We're sort of optimistically skeptical about Google, but it certainly is a good jumping off point. Now, Abby is showing me a number that is 250,000 people, I guess. Is that how many people are incarcerated in Canada?
The average is 250,000 people are incarcerated annually as adults. This does not include the youth justice system. And it costs an average of $150,000 Canadian for each of those prisoners every year.
Well, this is 37 billion, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say not every prisoner incarcerated spends a whole year in jail. But still, certainly a lot. I think even an interesting stat might be how much does Canada spend and the provinces spend on the justice system every year? Because, it's more than just the cost of putting someone for a night in jail that we have to consider. There's the court systems and the police officers' salaries and everything like that.
So it's about 43 billion annually for the justice system and jails included. So 37 billion might not be too far off if it's 43 in total when you add in lawyers and judges and court staff. But I think the point I'm trying to make is you mentioned 3 service prongs that are used by people who aren't able to connect to society and don't have skills that they're proud and happy and able to use to have gainful employment and have meaningful social connections. And those are, Ian, the justice system, the healthcare system,
the welfare system.
The welfare system. So if you look at just the justice system, $43 billion annually, if you were able to make sure every youth growing up in Canada was not in a crisis situation, had adequate education, were given real life skills, self-efficacy, the ability to tangibly create something for themselves, you will see a dramatic reduction in the amount of criminals in Canada. It is just how that works. I know it's anecdotal. I know this is possibly conjecture, but science is indicating that this is the case. So can you only imagine how much we could save in the other systems as well if we're able to give people a good start to life? So it might be expensive to modify the education system as initial upfront expense, but in the long term, what a dramatic savings for Canada.
And we're only at Wednesday. Yes. And to add to Abby's comments, because I think she's bang on the money. Now, we are not certainly the first, we might be the first couple. I don't know how many couples are championing various policy updates. I'm sure we're not. But we're probably not the only people to really endorse changes that are expensive upfront, likely, in order to save costs down the road. Like we talked about last episode or whenever we talked about it, the stitch in time saves nine philosophy really does apply to societies. And it's very clear it's better to be proactive than reactive. Although in developed countries, certainly we do see a tendency for societies to have become 90% reactive when you look at budgetary spending. Abby brought up a good example there. The justice system costs far more in Canadian revenue than proactive upfront courses and programming.
And I won't look it up because I know it's probably not greatest to see me on a phone with talking to me. But I want to say just round figures, because we did look this up the other night.
Mhm.
The healthcare system versus the total spending in Canada. So correct me if I'm wrong, it was around $500 billion and change that Canada spends every year.
Yeah, I think, again, don't quote us. I think it was 2025 or 2024. It was in Canada, $570 billion in government spending at the federal level.
Not including provincial. But how much of that approximately was healthcare costs?
If I recall, it was about 355 billion, but again.
So at least $500 billion is confidently spent by the federal government annually in Canada. We can say that for sure. It's definitely 500 something billion. And it was definitely more than $300 billion on healthcare. So more than 2/3 of the entire federal budget in Canada is spent on healthcare. That's a lot of money. And while healthcare is important, as an example, some of our import on physical fitness, on cooking, on eating properly, science is coming out with more and more examples of how exercising even a little bit every day, cutting back on processed foods, cutting back on sugar, cutting back on, really indulgent carbohydrate filled, not great everyday foods will dramatically improve your health. And can you imagine how much money Canada would save if everyone was relatively healthy and avoiding diseases that are sort of self-inflicted? And I know we don't like to talk about that all the time, and I know that can be a controversial topic, but if we're being honest with ourselves, a lot of the major problems in Canada are things like heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and in most cases, doctors are saying, hey, you probably wouldn't have had this problem had you led a healthier life.
That's exactly right. So always going back to the roots of our philosophy is damage. The idea that people in developed countries tend to know what they ought to do to live their best lives and to be their fundamentally happiest selves, I should say. And despite having the tools and resources to do it, we find in ourselves and in our close friends and people we see in society, we find that we're very self-sabotaging. And I agree with Abby that not only does that affect our own souls and our own quality of life and happiness, but it has a butterfly effect affecting all of society and causing great social debt. So now there are some countries that are doing much better than Canada. I will quickly concede that. There are some Scandinavian countries, for example, where the average cost of healthcare per person is a lot lower. I think in Canada, and again, this is going from memory, and maybe we can even look it up, but Abby, isn't it about $10,000 a year per person in Canada of healthcare expenses, roughly? Canada, for those watching from somewhere else, if you are watching, welcome, is mainly a public healthcare system. There is some privatization, but it's primarily public. So let's see how much a taxpayer, for example, might have to shoulder the cost per year.
I've asked, but it's not responding. I think I've gone to the. Give me 1 second.
That's okay. This is the first time we're using this device for the show, but while she's looking up that, what I wanted to say earlier was that even though a lot of people, I'm sure, regularly, even politicians who are sort of well-intentioned, you might say, put forward the idea of proactive policy, it's important to remember our story of the grain in the warehouse. And that story was, again, to catch us up, was about a warehouse where everyone stored their sacks of grain, but there was water leaking in. And so all the sacks of grain were getting wet. And so rather than run around trying to clean up their own sacks of grain, it was good for the people to go on the roof and patch the hole. And then all the sacks of grain could be dry. And all this to say is it's good to forward proactive policy, but if it's not policy that injects love into a system of damage, then in our argument, this is why it's never been successful at this point, why society continues to slide in the wrong direction rather quickly. So, what did we find out?
3 things.
Holy
The
mackerel.
first, Ian discovered voice to text. So when I tried to type it in, it brought me to the voice to text area. So even though I typed it, it wouldn't respond unless I spoke. So I felt that was maybe not the ideal for this moment. So that's why it took me a second. 2, the 2025 official expenses have not been released for Canada yet. But with the information we have, it is expected to hit $399 billion
In
2025, what we spent on healthcare last year.
healthcare.
So that is pretty much 400 billion. That's insane. And the average cost per person is expected to be around $9,626 per person.
Per year.
Ian was pretty close with $10,000 a year, but that includes everyone from a newborn infant to the most senior elderly individual in Canada.
And again, we don't want to dwell on the numbers, but we think it's relevant that a country like Canada, where there's lots of literacy, education, opportunities for health, we see that 50% of the federal budget, at least, needs to be spent on basically patching up. And we also acknowledge that a lot of medical expenses are sort of not directly tied to damage. They may be, for example, someone goes in to deliver a baby. This isn't something you could say, well, that person ought to have lived differently and therefore they cost the system money. We don't say that. And even people who have lived a life where unfortunately they've become unhealthy because of eating habits, again, the philosophy of damage is not that we blame that individual. That's been done before. It doesn't work in our view. In our view, it's important just to recognize that damage has this effect on people, and the effect on society is the cost. It's a little bit like a hunter, really. If you think about a hunter, and the hunter has to provide for the village, and they only have 3 arrows, let's say, in their quiver. So they go out one day, and they really want to shoot with their bow and arrow a mighty jackalope. It's not a real animal.
A grouse, maybe.
No, something more meaty. Say they want to shoot a deer. Okay, I was trying to think of something that wasn't cute.
Oh, maybe a turkey, because they're delicious. I love them, but they are delicious.
Okay. Abigail's greed has overcome her nurturing nature.
Have you eaten turkey before? If that is something you can partake in?
Yes. She has a very specific kind of gluttony, and it is the tasseled kind. No turkey is safe. So anyway, so yes, the hunter wants to go and find a delicious meaty turkey because the hunter is married to Abby, apparently, and has strict instructions. 3 arrows. So hunter goes out and shoots a grasshopper, and then shoots a earthworm, and then shoots a ladybug.
How?
Very close up. He gets right on top of them, right? And the arrows are broken and he can't shoot anymore. Well, then he sees a delicious looking turkey, perfect for Abby's turkey soup she was interested in, but has no more arrows. And in the same way, society, in our argument, can't be wasting the arrows of federal spending, that valuable quiver of arrows, which is finite and powerful, but if just sort of discarded and used for programs that aren't proactive and actually addressing the core issues of society, in the same way, we'll never have our turkey, which is to say a healthy, happy society and a healthy, happy Abby full of turkey. And you don't want that. So I think Abby's right to talk about these statistics. And again, give us margin of error and wiggle room. As long as we're generally giving you an accurate picture of how things are going, you'll have to forgive us. Now, just to wrap up the idea of high school for today. So we talked about parenting skills in the Monday, Tuesday situation, household skills, sure, cooking. I mentioned earlier that I thought in my own life, I wish I'd learned more handy person skills, being able to fix a leaky pipe, being able to change a fuse, these sort of things. Cars are going to be probably less and less prevalent in the future the way things are going, but still it's important to learn small engine repair, things like that. Again, this used to be called shop class in a lot of places, but bringing that back with a revamped twist to apply to modern society and the skills that are really going to empower young people, as we call them, young adults, becoming adults, that would be useful for example, Wednesdays. And then Thursdays, in the book, we talk about legal and sort of economic principles that I find when young adults go into the world in their 20s, they run into issues with the law. And I genuinely believe a lot of them saying, well, I didn't realize that I had to have a lock on my firearm, or I didn't realize that if I slept in the backseat of my car to sleep off a night of drinking, I could be arrested for drunken driving. You see things like this. And Abby mentioned taxes the last time, how to file taxes properly and how to do expenses. And they're very boring, but a teacher, a skill teacher, as Abigail is a skill teacher, can make these things fun through exercise and activity. I've done a little bit of teaching in my time. I can tell you, my experience is if the students are sitting down and not saying anything, the teaching is not going to be effective. Hey, Abby.
No, Ian is a big believer in the Socratic teaching method, which I also enjoy. I think it is very effective. And Ian, could you briefly just explain what that method is?
Well, whether or not it's exactly how Socrates planned it, I don't know. But what I like to do when I'm teaching a law class, for example, is to drum up a scenario and then I point to people and ask them questions. And then they will answer the questions and they feel engaged. The worst treated student is a silent student. But in any event,
I think another way maybe to say that is instead of me saying, as you can see from this picture, the criminal was wearing a red shirt, but in the transcription from the witness statement, they said a blue shirt. And how could this be a problem? You could say, class, I don't point to people. I let people voluntarily interact because I was one of those people who could not handle being picked on in class. So I don't like to put that panic into others. But I find if you create a safe space, they want to participate, which is great. But instead, you ask them, what do you notice about this image? And if they don't get to the clothing, okay, what about what they're wearing? Is there anything significant about that? Is there another resource we could look at to maybe see if there's any reason we should care about what this person is wearing? And you lead them, you scaffold, that's the word in education, you scaffold them to the answer by asking targeted questions to let them come to the conclusion themselves. So it's much more meaningful and it has much more of an impact.
Ooh, here's an example. The other day, there was a class of students who were doing police foundations. So they wanted to be police officers, which was great. So they all came in. And so I decided I was going to teach them. And they had a teacher, but that wasn't relevant at the time.
Ian does this thing where he just decides to do things, and then everyone just sort of lets him due to his whimsy and fun. So,
yes,
welcome.
yes. It's all about confidence. And so anyway, they sat around, and the way we did it on that particular day was I thought, okay, well, these police officers probably aren't interested in lawyer business or court proceedings so much. They're just starting in their program, so maybe they're interested about solving crimes. So we painted a scenario, and I said to them, well, you go into a house and you had a 911 call or an emergency call that said there was a violent episode in the house. Tell me what you would do. How would you gather evidence? And then I would point to people. And so maybe that's Socratic, maybe it's not. But the point is, for these types of programs that we want to see on Thursdays, hypothetically, to understand the world better and practical living in day-to-day life and pitfalls that a lot of people fall into. I mean, it wouldn't take a committee very long to put their heads together. If you went to a group of people over the age of 50 and just a focus group and just said, why don't you write down 3 things that you wish you knew when you started your adulthood that you now know? I bet you would get some great information. It could be as simple as tricks to raising a dog properly. Many people get dogs. Not a lot of people know that, if you don't clip their nails regularly, they can be, when they're puppies, they can be very adverse to it when they're older dogs, something like that. Anyway, that could be Thursday. And then, of course, Friday, we have a good day of traditional academia to make sure that the people going into the world can read and write at a good level and can do math that's relevant to most people and have some knowledge of that world.
And don't worry, as we continue on with the educational system, we have thought about this. And you may be saying, well, we haven't had enough time to explore all of the subjects. We have a plan for that, so don't worry. And your executive summary of what we've talked about today is essentially damage is not your fault. Inserting love stops damage. And the only way to really fix the problems caused by damage in society is to raise loving people and have more love to reduce damage, especially at a younger age. The younger you can inject love into someone's life and reduce damage, the more impactful it will be over their lives. So the reason we went over some of these numbers is because, yes, there will be an upfront expense to changing some of these policies. But if you can take a step back and look at all of the other expenses we're currently seeing because of damage that we could potentially reduce over time, it would be a net positive. So we're hoping that you look at the argument for what it is, not who's saying it, and you'll look at the impact that this could have and critically think about what it actually means when you consider these numbers and what in the long term these policies will do. And we've talked about some of the fun things you can learn in high school, which, to be honest, I'm excited. I'd want to go back and learn some of these things for myself just for fun.
Which day?
All of them. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Any closing remarks, Ian?
No, thank you for stopping by. And thank you, fact checker Abby, for giving us those numbers. That was exciting.
Yeah. Have a great day.